Top 10 Brutal Unsolved Halloween Murders. Welcome to Creepshow, where we explore the dark and disturbing mysteries that haunt the shadows of our world. Halloween is a night of thrills and chills, but for some, it has been the setting of unimaginable horrors. Tonight, we delve into the top 10 brutal unsolved Halloween murders, cases where the horror of the night lingered long after the last jack-o'-lantern was extinguished. These are real stories, real victims, and real nightmares. Stay with us as we uncover the chilling details behind these unsolved cases. Number 10. The murder of Roland DeLoatch and Joseph Smith. Halloween night 2016 flipped the life of a family upside down. Living in Sanford, Florida, Roland DeLoatch, 41, and Joseph Smith, 28, looked after their mother, Barbara. Aspiring rapper Joseph was 2 weeks away from record release. An unknown intruder in a mask broke into the brothers' house about 9 p.m. The masked invader shot Joseph right away. Just getting back from work, Roland heard the gunshot and dashed to help his family. The gunman just shot him right next. Though the invader forced her drop on her knees and beg for her life, Barbara, who saw her sons killed, was spared. Joseph passed away at the house. Roland passed away in a hospital not far by. Nobody knew the brother killer's name. On November 11th, there seemed to be a bright development. That day, the Sanford police designated Dante James as a subject of interest. James had been detained on firearms charges the day before Halloween, along with his girlfriend, Roberta Seal, also reported as Roberta Seals. They were freed on bond. James cut his GPS anklet and left. On November 22nd, he was taken under arrest. Although James was judged to have knowledge about the murders, investigators found he could not have been the killer. They wouldn't, however, help the cops. Though she wouldn't cooperate either, Joseph's girlfriend is thought to know anything about the incident. The killer stays at large even with a $5,000 reward for any information on the murders. Number 9. The murder of Sylvia Salinas. October 31st, 1989 saw 30-year-old Sylvia Salinas working in Galveston, Texas, at her little corner grocery business. She kept both a machete and a revolver under the cash register, clearly mindful of the likelihood of her company being looted. For Sylvia touched neither. Whomever entered the store that day must not have raised any red signals. Maybe that was someone she knew. Still, this unnamed man stabbed Sylvia in the heart, killing her. Sylvia did not set off the quiet alarm, and there were no signs she tried to fight back. The killer accomplished that for himself when he pawed the register open to retrieve the money. Before the cops showed, however, he left, leaving the knife at the site. They started gathering proof while enclosing the area. Investigators never located Sylvia's killer, in spite of their best efforts and interviewing of almost 20 people. To exacerbate the situation, the cold case became all the more relevant in 2008 following much of the evidence lost to Hurricane Ike. But in 2018, the case attracted fresh interest when word of a crucial piece of evidence, a videotape taken by police of the crime scene shortly after Sylvia was killed, hit the headlines. Now represents the best hope for solving the murder since it depicts the crime scene in great detail, including the murder weapon and killer footprints. A few fingerprints were likewise preserved. Number 8. The killing of Anthony Seabell. Halloween night 2013 in New York City was a violent one. 2 males in Queens suffered non-fatal gunshot wounds. 3 guys were shot to death in Brooklyn. Among the Brooklyn murders, one of them, that of Anthony Seabell, got somewhat more notice than the others. Anthony, age 19, was walking on East 31st Street in the Farragut area at about 8:30 p.m. when a man clearly identifiable from the Scream movies fired against him. Anthony was hit in the head by a bullet. The ghost face masked assailant fled. Taken to Kings County Hospital, Anthony passed away there. Though the killer dressed as a horror movie villain, first media coverage of the case was minimal. It is yet unknown the man's identity wearing the Scream mask. Number 7. The Killing of Derek Grain. Derek Grain spent 2 months in Bristol, England, briefly employed by British Aerospace in nearby Filton at the end of October 1980. Although Derek was known to have quite a few beers when he would go out on the town, he was not famous for being aggressive or prone to starting bar fights. For those who knew him, that truth added even more unexpected elements to his tragedy. Derek visited 2 nightclubs on October 30th evening, Vicky's and then Curves, both on Park Street. He departed Curves about 2 a.m. on October 31st, likely to get back to his room at the Unicorn Hotel. But he decided to go along Brandon Hill Lane, a decision that would later baffle police. Derek never returned to the motel, whatever his intentions. A nurse later that morning found Brandon Hill dead in a pool of his own blood, laying face down. Found 240 feet, 73 m, distant was a traffic cone loaded with sand. With this strange murder weapon, Derek had been beaten to death. The assailant or attackers seemed to have kicked his corpse the ground repeatedly. The reason was thought to have been robbery. Between 50 and 60 warrants had been taken from Derek's pockets. His bank cards were strewn throughout the crime scene. The killer or killers might have followed Derek after he dropped big sums of money at the clubs. Apart from the murder weapon, another hint was a bloody footprint on the rear of Derek's shirt. Leads quickly became apparent. Several witnesses stepped forward to tell of 3 or 4 men attacking a lone victim close to Clifton Hill at about 3 or 4 in a.m. Additionally claimed to have been about was a red Jaguar sports car, not usually seen in the area. The leads failed, though, and developments in forensics over time have not been able to clarify the murder any further. Traffic cone analysis has yielded not much practical information. Derek's garments pockets were searched in 2009 in search of DNA left by whoever killed him, but this too proved useless. The matter is still open, unresolved. Number 6. The Murder of Norton Gregory. In the 1950s, Kirkland, Washington was a peaceful area. On a road leading to adjacent Redmond, which today is the much busy Northeast 70th Street, stood a little convenience shop and petrol station. Norton Gregory first opened it in 1952. Norton resided with his wife Helen and 6 children a few blocks away. Mrs. O'Farrell, a customer, came into the business on October 31st, 1957 and discovered Norton on the floor. He had 5 headshots from a gun. Amazingly, he was still hanging on to life at that point, but his wounds would finally cause him to die. Soon after Mrs. O'Farrell phoned the King County Sheriff's Office, officials showed up. She never again set foot in the store. Of the 5 bullets Norton took, 3 were fired at close range, the coroner discovered later. It was hypothesized that maybe he had came upon someone pilfering money from the cash register, and the burglar panicked and began firing. Though these were never confirmed, rumors of people harboring resentment or Norton having gambling debts circulated about. To the surprise of many, Helen reopened the store just a few weeks after Norton passed away and oversaw it personally. She subsequently wed a deputy sheriff. 1958 seemed to be the year the case would be resolved at first. A teenage confessing killer of Norton informed investigators where the murder weapon may be located. But it found out that the lad had been a patient at Western State Hospital on the murder day. Since then, the case has gone very chilly. The most recent entries in the file come from 1966. Norton's killer could very well be dead today. Number 5. The Murder of Arpana Jinaga. Arpana Jinaga was a really remarkable young woman. Having graduated from Rutgers and working for a Bellevue, Washington company, the 24-year-old software engineer, her interests outside of the office included taekwondo and motorcycles. She also helped at an animal rescue and a fire station. Arpana was, all things considered, happy in life and popular. But Arpana's father started to worry throughout the first weekend of November 2008. She had not returned several calls. Monday morning, Arpana's next-door neighbor accompanied a friend of his who visited her flat in Redmond. The door to her flat had been pushed open, they found. The floor of Arpana's bedroom yielded her naked body. She had been raped, most likely, beaten badly, and gagged with duct tape. A neighboring bootlace used to strangle her was the apparent murder weapon. Arpana's killer had acted to erase proof. Her hands were covered with toilet bowl cleaning while motor oil had been splashed over her body and other objects. Her bed had been stripped of the sheets. The comforter was discovered soaking in the water. Another blanket had been half burned. How had this come to pass? Arpana and others in her apartment complex had hosted a combined Halloween party dispersed over multiple flats. She left an apartment on the ground floor and headed to her own, on the third floor, last seen alive at about 3 a.m. the next morning. Her neighbors then heard muffled moaning sounds, but they considered the noise to be suggestive of consensual intercourse. It wasn't exactly. Arpana is thought to have been killed about at 8 a.m. She was not discovered until November 3rd. DNA was collected from the crime scene despite efforts by the killer to obliterate proof. The issue was 3 separate people owned it. The DNA in the bootlace came from an alibi man. Along with the duct tape, Arpana found DNA belonging to a man called Emmanuel Fair, a convicted sex offender who raped a 14-year-old girl in 2004 on her neck. Found in a garbage can close by, a robe splattered with the victim's blood also yielded DNA. Arpana's own next-door neighbor, who had been on hand when her father's friend found her death, was the third man. His DNA turned up on a motor oil bottle among the debris near the robe. When the neighbor sought to remove proof he had contacted Arpana on the night she was killed, he further stoked mistrust. Actually, he was the final one to give her a call before she died. He tried to run to Canada as well. Still, a lack of proof meant he was never charged with her murder. In 2010, Emile Fair was charged. In 2017, his first trial resulted in a hung jury. He was cleared in June 2019. The neighbor testified, but claimed his Fifth Amendment protection against stating anything which could incriminate him, therefore limiting the questions asked during the second trial. Furthermore, since the evidence for this argument was judged inadequate, it had been decided previously that prosecutors could not claim that Fair and the neighbor killed Arpana simultaneously. Later on, a juror told the media that Fair was cleared mostly because the panel couldn't be certain the neighbor wasn't the only killer. A clear response to Arpana Jinaga's case still elusive. Number 4. The murder of James Adamski. From a Halloween party in 1982, James Adamski never returned home. On October 30th, the 18-year-old Cheektowaga, New York, inhabitant bade his family farewell late evening. The costumed high school senior attended a party at a nearby Depew pub. James drank rather a lot. Guests just paid an entrance charge to drink all they desired. Later on, witnesses would say James was seen fighting with a small group of other party attendees at one point. James headed for home early the next morning, some 2 miles, 3.2 kilometers, distant. James pressed on by himself after walking with a girl for a portion of the trip and splitting at an intersection. It was about 3:30 a.m. at that moment. James disappeared from view once more. When his parents missed their kid the next morning, they suspected something was wrong. Searching several weeks turned up nothing, and people were perplexed at James's absence. He was not known for causing problems, hence nobody could think of someone who would have seen him as an adversary. 2 hunters discovered a body in a modest tomb on December 26th. Still sporting his Halloween outfit was James. About 4 miles, 6.4 kilometers, from where he had last been seen, he had been buried in twigs and leaves. Investigators found blunt force trauma as the cause of his death, notwithstanding the elapsed time. James had suffered multiple blows to his forehead from an unidentified blunt weapon. Throughout the following inquiry, hundreds of people were questioned, but no arrests were made. Detectives found that James's quarrel at the party had nothing bearing on his death. The scene of his burial provided little clue on the killer. James, still intoxicated, is thought to have been picked up in a car during his trek. It's difficult to establish if this individual was someone James knew or a stranger driven to kill a hitchhiker. More than 30 years later, efforts to crack the puzzle still go on. James took his costume to a lab for DNA testing in 2016. Any tip that might result in an arrest for his murder could earn a $11,000 incentive in 2017. The case stays cold all the same. Number 3. The murder of Roberta Miller. In August 2010, Roberta Bobby Miller, 54, settled into her Guilford, New Hampshire house. This followed a sour divorce from her former spouse, Gary Miller. Ready to start her life, Roberta lived with Scout and attended online programs. Halloween night, someone dropped by Roberta's house. Given no evidence of forced access, she apparently let this individual in. Then Roberta's apparent guest shot Scout several times as well. Roberta suffered a shotgun blast to her skull, the deadly blow. The kitchens turned out the bodies. Roberta's ex-husband looked like a potential suspect. Money had caused problems during the divorce. Gary Miller asked for contempt against Roberta not long before the murder. Her settlement agreement said that she was to pay half of the income tax due for the prior year. Court records state Roberta claimed she lacked the funds to do so. Strangely, a main house owned by Gary was burned down in what turned out to be arson 2 days before Roberta was killed on October 29th. Gary was never charged with Roberta's murder, despite early on in the inquiry heavy police scrutiny. Their daughter claims that Gary became pretty depressed when Roberta passed away. Furthermore, not stolen by Roberta's killer was $26,000 in cash at her house. Roberta's mother paid for a billboard in 2015 pledging a $53,000 prize for any information that resulted in a conviction. The matter still remains unresolved. Number 2. The murder of Terressa Vanegas. Last seen heading home on October 31, 2006, Terressa Vanegas, 16 years old from Dickinson, Texas, was last seen at roughly 11 p.m. Her body was discovered lying face down in a pool on a neglected soccer field on November 3rd. The teenage girl had strangled and been raped. Terressa was killed with her own belt, claims her relatives. The killer also felt compelled to chop her lengthy hair short. Teressa's friend Kimberly Ramsey, 15, had vanished not long before. Not long after Terressa was killed, she was discovered alive. The person she was with was accused of harboring a runaway. Still, it was decided later that her disappearance had nothing bearing on the crime. Teressa's case has been connected to a tract of land known as the Texas Killing Fields, where roughly 30 murder victims, mostly teenagers and young women, have been discovered since the 1970s. Teressa's case remained open as of 2018. However, detectives acknowledged they lacked evidence. Though 45 persons had been questioned about the murder and several leads had been explored, no suspects had been identified. Teressa's family and detectives both intend to keep looking for her killer, though Teressa's relatives especially so. Number 1. The murder of Katherine Armstrong. Living in Newcastle upon Tyne, England, Katherine Lillian Armstrong was a 70-year retiree in 1963. On October 31st, the devoted Methodist had scheduled attendance at a choir meeting for her church, with which she regularly sung at 7:30 p.m. She missed the meeting even though she was seen very much alive and well just an hour before. When Katherine's cousin Ada Ridley visited the next morning, she was shocked to find the Katherine's drapes still closed. Ada contacted the police when the door yielded no response. Neither did they get any response. When a sergeant arrived at the house, Katherine had been mercilessly killed. Stabbed 28 times in the head and face. Tucked around her neck was a nylon stocking. Though there were no indications of forced access, defensive wounds on her hands suggested Katherine had resisted her assailant. The inquiry into Katherine's murder would be the biggest the area has seen at that time. For Newcastle's police department, leave was cancelled. Those already on leave were summoned back to work. Scotland Yard was contacted for help a few hours after the body was discovered. To no effect, the area was scoured thoroughly for the murder weapon. 2 months later, 50 detectives were solving the murder, working 18 hours a day. 16,000 persons had been questioned at the beginning of the next year. All the same, researchers had nothing. There were many of suggestions. Some thought Katherine had been killed by some young people. Police searched the records of everyone just freed from jail who had been found guilty of violence against elderly ladies. Closely scrutinized was a man who had been the main suspect in the beating death of a 71-year-old woman. Still, none of these lines of inquiry turned anywhere. Nobody knows who stabbed Katherine Armstrong to death on Halloween night in 1963 today. Thank you for joining us on this chilling journey through some of the darkest Halloween nights in history. If you found these stories as haunting as we did, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to Creepshow, and ring the bell so you never miss an episode of True Terror. What do you think happened in these unsolved cases? Let us know in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe, and remember, some nightmares never end.